Aaron, thanks. Good evening, everyone. We begin tonight with our special coverage of the death of Whitney Houston. Her funeral on Saturday will be private in her hometown, Newark, New Jersey. Governor Chris Christie today ordering flags to be flown at half-staff on that day. Her family deciding against a big public memorial. Earlier reports said they were considering a 20,000-seat arena. Instead, no wake, no public viewing. Services will take place in the neighborhood church that she grew up in, New Hope Baptist in Newark. The church she first sang in, sitting in those very pews. This is where people first heard that incredible voice coming from the choir. Janet Jackson knew and admired Whitney Houston and her voice. I talked to her today about her friend and the gift that she had. You'll hear her shortly. Dr. Drew Pinsky also joins us to help us understand the role a prescription drug that Houston was taking might have played in her death. And 360 MD Sanjay Gupta as well is on to talk about how Houston's history with narcotics could have broken her body down over time. First, though, more on the very latest. The gold-colored hearse carrying the body of Whitney Houston was greeted by crowds of fans shortly before midnight last night as it pulled up to this funeral home in Newark, New Jersey. Houston's mother, Sissy, arrived earlier and waited inside to receive her daughter's body. Friends say she's overwhelmed but staying strong. Newark is Houston's hometown, and a private funeral will be held on Saturday at the house of worship she attended as a child, the New Hope Baptist Church. How the 48-year-old singer died is still unclear, and the investigation has so far yielded very few answers. Authorities are examining bottles of prescription pills found inside her hotel room the day she died. Friends say she was taking medication for a throat infection and was also taking the drug Xanax for anxiety. Houston had a well-known struggle with drugs and alcohol in recent years. However, a family friend tells CNN she was no longer an addict and didn't use hard drugs anymore. She'd let it go, this family friend said, and we were proud of her. Authorities downplayed the significance of the pills found in the hotel room, saying the amount they found was less than what's usually found in an overdose situation. But they said they'd still be looking for any signs of illegal or prescription drugs in Houston's body at the time of her death.
No matter what medications they're taking, until we run a tox and see the level and what's in the system, we're not going to speculate.
Investigators are also speaking with Houston's medical team, according to the Los Angeles Times, to learn of any underlying conditions she may have had. On Saturday, she was found unconscious and unresponsive underwater in the bath by her assistant, Mary Jones, who called for help. Her staff pulled her out of the tub, and authorities arrived on scene minutes later. They tried to resuscitate Houston, but it was too late. She was pronounced dead in the hotel room.
Share this moment with me.
Days after her death, the music world continues to pay tribute to Houston. Aretha Franklin honored her during a private concert on Monday night, shown here on ABC's Good Morning America.
Miss Whitney Elizabeth Houston.
In 4 days, Houston will be laid to rest, but it'll be weeks until investigators have final answers over what may have caused her sudden and shocking death. Let's dig deeper now in the role, if any, drugs, especially prescription drugs, may have played in Whitney Houston's death. A close family friend tells CNN that Houston was, in his words, no longer an addict, no longer using hard drugs. He said she'd been clean from hard drugs for 3 years, but took Xanax for anxiety, adding that it was not unusual for her to have a drink when she went out. And we won't know for several weeks whether Houston combined the two before she died or took excessive amounts of either. Joining us now is 360 MD Sanjay Gupta, an addiction medicine specialist, Dr. Drew Pinsky, host of Dr. Drew on HLN. Sanjay, as I said, we don't know what Houston died of. We're waiting these toxicology results. What can happen, though, to a human body when even a small amount of prescription drugs are mixed together, and worse, when alcohol is added to that mix?
Well, the best way to think about this is you think about the umbrella term central nervous system depressants. It's a big term, but basically it means these medications, even in isolation, can sort of depress your central nervous system and affect the things that you don't think about in your body, your ability to regulate your heart rate, your blood pressure, and also your drive to breathe. So in isolation, they can do this. That's something that people try and be mindful of. But when you add things together, to your point, and you mix in alcohol as well, it's not a 1 + 1 = 2 situation. When they say the term synergistic, they're referring to this idea that in combination, they're somehow worse than just simply being additive. So the idea that someone, you know, these things that you don't think about are affected, your blood pressure, heart rate, breathing, that's possibility with the mixing of these medications.
Dr. Drew, Whitney Houston's last performance was with singer Kelly Price. It was very impromptu at a party 2 nights before her death. Kelly Price told me she saw Whitney Houston drinking champagne, as many people were at this party. I just want to play that. Did it worry you to see her drinking at all? I mean, given her past?
Well, no, I wasn't worried about it. I didn't see where it was excessive. I saw her with a couple of glasses of champagne, and then our interactions were normal. There was nothing that seemed that it was over the top. She didn't seem to be intoxicated to me. Again, I know intoxicated when I see it, and so I wasn't worried about it at all.
You said that hearing from her friends like that makes you angry. Why?
Oh, Anderson, it is, I'm no disrespect, but this is the highest level of ignorance. The fact is that just because somebody isn't doing hard drugs does not mean their addiction is not active. Please, everybody, I'm trying to get this message across to the world, and it seems to be falling on deaf ears. If you have addiction today, you're not going to die of hard drugs. You're going to die a prescription death. That is how addicts die today. Period. Every one of my patients in the last 5 years that has died of their addictive pathology was taking medications a doctor prescribed, often the way their doctor told them, but they happen to put them in combination because they're an addict. They take a little more than everybody else and put in a little alcohol. Seeing Whitney with a champagne in her hand should have been an alarm sounding for all of her friends. They should have pulled her aside and said, Whitney, you were in treatment just last May. My God, what's going on? You seem to be not doing so well. Let's get you to a meeting right away. Where the goal is abstinence for a reason, not because it's mean or mean-spirited, but because it's what saved lives. People with addiction do not put pills in their mouth without being in harm's way. And when are we going to learn this? How many deaths? Brittany Murphy, Michael Jackson. Just go down the list. Every single celebrity you've seen die in the last 5 years has been a prescription death with the duplicitous involvement of their physician without understanding the addictive pathology, just as these friends are not understanding it.
But Dr. Drew, I mean, there's plenty of people who take Xanax and have a glass of champagne. No? Or am I completely wrong?
And they're not drug addicts. These are, listen, Anderson, I got to interrupt you again. Absolutely, these are excellent medications used properly. Listen, opiates, pain medication, these are exceedingly important medication unless you're an opiate addict. Sir William Osler, at the turn of the century, called opiates, morphine sulfate, God's own medicine, because we could eliminate suffering. It's extremely compelling for physicians to give opiates and end suffering. The problem is for people with a certain genetic makeup, it has a very dark side that will kill them if they continue to be exposed to it. Sanjay, don't you agree with me?
Well, I think there's a certain percentage of people who, when they take these things in combination, even if they haven't been addicts, that's the thing. And people think there's this perception that prescription drugs, because they're prescription drugs, are safer somehow than the illicit drugs like cocaine and heroin. And to Dr. Drew's point, I mean, one person dies every 19 minutes of prescription drug overdoses. I'm sure a lot of those people were addicts, but I think, you know, there's a larger message here. You know, the business traveler who takes a Xanax, maybe has a drink, and then takes an Ambien to sleep at night. That may sound more familiar than I realized. But that can really get somebody in trouble, regardless of whether they even had an addiction history in the past. So it's quite frightening. The CDC calls this a silent epidemic.
Sanjay? It's not so silent. We're reporting on it every night here on CNN and HLN. I'm talking about it every night on my show at 9 o'clock. But the fact is here, we have to understand that this is what kills people. I'll refer you back to leagues of rock stars that did God knows how much illicit drugs. They did their cocaine. Look at Ozzy. Look at Rolling Stones. They did tons of illicit drugs. They're alive. It's since we've graduated to prescription drugs that the death rate of addiction has gone up dramatically. You can go to any 12-step meeting in this country, and it's filled with people with pill problems all of a sudden. So it wasn't that way 5 years ago, and it's much more pernicious. It's as you see, Sanjay, we're having trouble getting people to understand that it's even a massive issue and it's dangerous.
Well, Sanjay, I find what you just said really interesting. So you can, if I've never had a Xanax, but if you take a Xanax and an Ambien and have a sip of alcohol or a couple of alcohols, that can be a real problem for somebody, even somebody who's not an addict?
That's right. I mean, more than a sip of alcohol, presumably. But the thing about it is, it goes back to this idea again that these medications in isolation, have a certain impact on the central nervous system. And while no one, I think the perception is, while no one says, having a drink is a good idea. I mean, you're warned when you get these medications not to take these in combination with alcohol. The message probably hasn't been loud enough that, look, it's not just a bad idea. You could die from this unintentionally, and it's the #1 cause of death now among a certain age population in this country. And it's more common cause of death than cocaine and heroin combined. It is more common, either intentionally or accidentally, than car accidents in this country. You think about car accidents and how common they are.
It's interesting, Dr. Drew, to hear the source, a family friend, saying to CNN that she was no longer an addict. Most addicts I know will say, I'm still an addict, I'm just not using.
Let's be super clear. If you are had sufficient relationship with a chemical that you are given the diagnosis of addiction and admitted, you meet criteria for admission to a drug treatment center, that is the same as saying you're a diabetic or you're an asthmatic or you have cancer. There's criteria, you met that criteria, and just like those other conditions, it is a chronic disease in the case of addiction, like diabetes, that will be with you the rest of your life. Period. And it has to be managed on a daily basis, or it is active. Now, the degree of activity varies. It can be as mild as, hey, I'm dying to have a drink, or as active as, hey, I'm slamming heroin. It's a spectrum. And when somebody who has been diagnosed with this is toasting with champagne, they are in harm's way.
So again, pardon my ignorance on this, but I think this is a larger, more important conversation. Is it ever okay for somebody who's been an addict with pills or cocaine or whatever to then have a drink of alcohol, even if they're not using the other? I mean, if you're an addict in one thing, are you an addict in all?
It is not to put your audience to sleep with this biology, but it is a disorder of a deep region of the brain called the medial forebrain bundle, the reward apparatus, and anything that triggers that reward apparatus with an extra physiological biology triggers the disease of addiction. It just so happens that all chemicals that cause addiction share that potential. So any of these things will reawaken the dragon.
It's a tragic discussion to have, but I think it's an important one. Dr. Drew, appreciate it. Sanjay as well. Thank you.
You got it. Thanks.
Again, it's important to point out we don't know how Whitney Houston died. We don't know if drugs played a part. That said, drug abuse is a serious problem in this country. And as Sanjay said, one person in America dies every 19 minutes from prescription drug misuse. As Sanjay also pointed out, they're not all drug addicts. As I said, it is a very serious problem. Let us know what you think. We're on Facebook, Google+, add us to your circles, or follow me on Twitter tonight. @Anderson Cooper is the address. I'll be tweeting tonight. Just ahead, Janet Jackson on the Whitney Houston that she knew, her unforgettable voice, and the loss her family is now feeling. Later, Bobby Brown is speaking out about his daughter. We'll bring you that, and we'll take a closer look at their explosive marriage and turbulent life together. Whitney Houston was admired by more than just her fans. Her voice left even her fellow singers breathless. Janet Jackson among them. She admired Houston's talent, and she's been through the kind of loss, the investigation, the questions and rumors, all of it that the Houston family is now experiencing. I spoke with Janet Jackson today for an interview that's going to air Monday on my daytime program, Anderson. Here's some of the moments that stood out. We've all been kind of reeling from the death of Whitney Houston. When you heard the news, what did you think?
I couldn't believe it. Immediately I started shaking. I was trying to text everyone that I knew to let them know. And I was speechless. I could not believe it.
Where were you when you heard the news?
I was home here. And I just so happened to be watching TV, and I saw this news flash. And I still can't believe it.
We've all been kind of re-listening to her and you know, her performance singing the Star-Spangled Banner. And to you, I mean, what was she like as a performer?
Incredible. I mean, she was known as the voice. And just when she would open her mouth and this instrument would come out, you would obviously understand why. She was such a sweet, sweet soul. And especially back in the late 80s, early 90s is when I connected with Whitney the most. And it doesn't matter if we were doing an award show or... We would always take the time out to find one another. Either she'd come to my dressing room to say hey, and I'd be in makeup, or I'd find her in her dressing room to say hey, and we'd always spend time to talk with one another. She was such a sweet soul.
My thoughts, obviously, and I think everybody is with her daughter, Bobby Christina, who, I mean, it's just got to be reeling.
It's very devastating, and I pray for her and her family, and even Bobby. I mean, he's going through so much. They're all going through so much. Their mother. Yeah. It's very sad.
And her mother spoke to her a short time before she passed, and again, I mean, for a parent to outlive a child is just, you know, it's the worst thing there is. What advice do you have for her family, for her kid?
For her
child.
It's just it's a very, very tough time. I mean, it's even though it's still a loss. I lost my brother, she lost her mother. There's still a difference, even though it's still a loss from the family. So I don't truly know what that is like, and being so young. Yeah. But it was hard for me. It was very, very difficult for me. I didn't want to accept it. It's very difficult, and you have to come to terms at some point. You have to actually give it up to God, and it sounds so mean, but you have to move on. You can't hold on to that, because it could be very devastating. Yeah. And sometimes therapy is the best thing.
Yeah, and TV people always use that word closure when they're talking about loss. And as someone who's lost family members as well, yes. I don't think there is such a thing as closure. I think that's such a made-up TV word.
No, I don't think there is either. But you have to go on with life. You figure out a way to move on with life. But it's always right here. And there's never a day where I don't think about not one day has gone by where I don't think about my brother. And my other brothers and sisters have said the same thing.
Janet Jackson earlier today. Again, the full interview airs next Monday on my daytime program, Anderson. Check your local listings for that. Friends of Whitney Houston say she had battled demons even in her early days. Last night, Jennifer Holliday told Piers Morgan they were all around a lot of drugs back in the 80s, and Houston was using. As far as the public was concerned, though, Whitney Houston's unraveling only became really apparent after she and Bobby Brown married back in 1992. Brown canceled a concert tour, rushed back to Los Angeles last night. He's the one in the blue hoodie in the middle of that pack of photographers. Late today, Brown issued a statement concerning his daughter, Bobby Christina, who was hospitalized shortly after her mother died. It reads, quote, "My daughter did visit with doctors at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles on Saturday. She's been released and is presently with my family, including her siblings. Obviously, the death of her mother is affecting her. However, we will get through this tragedy as a family. Again, I ask for privacy during this time." Privacy, though, has not always been high on Bobby Brown's agenda or Whitney Houston's. For years, they pursued publicity and drew notoriety. More on that tonight from Randy Kay.
On Saturday, Bobby Brown took to the stage to declare his love for his ex-wife.
I would like to say, I love you, Whitney.
As this Eye report shows, he was there for a reunion of the 1980s boy band New Edition, of which Brown was a founding member, with songs like Cool It Now and Candy Girl.
My girl's the best, and that's no lie. She told me that I'm her only guy.
New Edition wrote a string of hits out of Boston's mean streets and into stardom. But Brown's onstage antics and a feud with fellow member Ralph Tresvant led the group to kick Brown out in 1986. Undaunted, Brown went on to a successful solo career with hits like My Prerogative and Every Little Step from his 1988 album, Don't Be Cruel. Brown and Houston married in 1992. On the surface, it seemed perfect, the pop princess and the R&B singer. But there were signs of trouble. In 1995, Brown was present at a shooting outside a seedy Boston bar that claimed the life of his bodyguard, Stephen Seeley. Seeley was shot in the head several times and died inside a Bentley, registered to Whitney Houston. Then there are Brown's arrests. For DUI in 1996, for marijuana possession and speeding in 2002, parole violations in 2003.
Bobby!
And in 2005, the couple put their rocky marriage on a short-lived reality show called Being Bobby Brown for all the world to see.
You're going to hear this for the rest of the year. You're going to hear this for the rest of the year. You don't think about me saying everybody else with me, and I'm trying to do the last thing you listen. I'm tired. It's not right. It's not right. I will do it to you.
By the time that reality show aired, Houston's career was already in tatters. 2 years later, so was her marriage. They divorced after 15 years together, and Brown was not awarded custody of their daughter, Bobby Christina. Brown explained to The Insider why their marriage had been so volatile.
How often would you and Whitney use together? I used an awful lot. What were your drugs of choice during those times?
Cocaine. Cocaine. It's a powerful drug. I just think I was bored, you know. I had just gotten married and, you know, things wasn't right. Unfortunately, I turned to alcohol and drugs.
But Brown was trying to leave that type of behavior behind. And despite their tumultuous marriage, People magazine reports that on Saturday, Brown cried on stage over the death of his ex-wife. Randy Kay, CNN, Atlanta.
We're going to have much more ahead, including a rare look at Whitney Houston performing when she was young. Also ahead, there are reports that Houston was close to broke when she died, facing foreclosure on at least one of her homes.